Everybody, good morning. As you just heard, I'm Dacey. I'm the National Programme Manager for a programme called Disrupting Exploitation that we run across England. And we have in that programme tried to put systems change into practice. So that's what I'm going to talk about today.
Morning.
Morning.
My name's Adam Groves. I work as the design lead for the Children's Society. So the organisation, which we'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, is trying to take a design-led approach to tackling problems. And as Lucy says, today we're going to talk through our work in two ways. So one is we'll give you a little bit of background and context for our journey into systems change. And I will share our thinking and our approach to the work. And then Lucy is going to give you a real-world example of it in practice and share the learnings and the kind of the difficult truth about trying to do it in reality. First, a little bit about the Children's Society. So, 1881 in South London in the UK, there was a Sunday school teacher called Edward Rudolph. And he was teaching his Sunday class, and he noticed that two young boys had not turned up. They hadn't come to Sunday school, and he was worried about them. And so he went out looking for them, and he found them begging on the street, begging for food, because their father had died and they were in poverty. And Edward Rudolph thought this is completely unsatisfactory. This is before the days of a welfare state. There was no safety net for these children. And in his role as a vicar, he started working with the Church of England to establish an organisation that would provide small, loving homes for the children. And that organisation became the Children's Society. So we have a long history. I was looking up on Wikipedia before arriving what was happening in Finland in 1881. I couldn't find any specific events, but it's a long time ago. 138 years later, so the organisation has changed a lot now. We no longer run children's homes, but we are a national organisation, 780 staff, with 71 services across the country that deliver a range of support. So working on child sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, migrant services, and to support children in poverty. Alongside our service delivery, we deliver campaigns. We have a research team, policy team. So it's a national organisation with a wide array of work. Our strategy at the moment is to try and disrupt the disadvantages that young people face. So to try and kind of get under the skin and behind the presenting issues that young people turn up to our services with, and to try and disrupt them. And that led us on a journey to think beyond just delivering one-to-one support to young people. So to go beyond helping individual young people, and to think what would it look like to change the system. To really change and challenge the system of support that young people receive. As Sarah said in the introduction, it's in a way like it's in the organisational DNA. So in some senses, the organisation has always done this. But 2 years ago, this language was not at all common in our sector, and certainly not in our organisation. If you said to any of our practitioners, "Hey, we're going to do systems change," they'd have looked and smiled politely, but not knowing what you meant. And now, 2 years later, I think we're gradually trying to make it a core of our work. So we've been thinking, what does systems change mean to us as an organisation? But before we tell you what we think, we thought we would give you an opportunity to tell us what you think. So we're going to ask you to spend 10 minutes talking in pairs or groups to answer these three questions. Now, I should say, I've been instructed to do this because apparently things are not good at small talk. And we have to encourage you to talk together is what I've been told. I'm not sure if I was supposed to admit to that or not, but I'd like you to get into your pairs and to say, so we've got three questions. So what does systems change mean to you, if anything? Maybe it means nothing. why do you think it's important, if you think it's important? And I guess another way of asking that question is, why are you here today? Why do you want to learn about systems change? And then, if you think you've seen it in practice, what are the examples? What have you learned? So we're going to give you 10 minutes to talk in pairs and groups to get to know each other, and then we're going to reflect back. And that will be the context for our presentation that will help us know what kinds of questions we should answer. Okay, clear? Just going to stand Zoom on side. It's on? We're live?
We're live.
Right.
Seamless.
I just need to be in front of the camera.
Yes, I'll try and not walk around. Hello everybody online, really good of you to join us. We've just been talking in the room about what systems change means and what people's experience of it is. We'll spend 30 seconds now reintroducing ourselves. So Lucy, do you want to?
Yeah, of course.
So hi everyone, I'm Lucy Dacey. I'm the National Programme Manager for a programme called Disrupting Exploitation that the Children's Society run in England, and it's essentially trying to put systems change into practice through a programme of work.
And my name is Adam. I work as the design lead at the Children's Society. The Children's Society is a national charity in the UK that supports young people through a variety of difficulties, from sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation. We work with refugee and migrant children, and with lots of children in care as well. So we're going to talk to you today about as Lucy says, a practical example of trying to make systems change happen. So I'm going to hand over to Lucy we're going to try and answer the questions we've been discussing in the room back. So the first one was what does systems change mean? And this is what it means to us.
Thanks. Can I switch places with you?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. It's a very tight stage. And it's a bit too short for Adam as well, but it's perfect for me. So the first definition there is from a programme of work that is not run by the Children's Society. It's run by a funding programme called Fulfilling Lives, and it's intended for supporting adults with complex needs. But we started with this definition because we thought that if we could affect those different things, so organisations, policies, the culture and the way that we work, and the beliefs and the environments that make up that system, if we could affect those different points, we would have a sustainable impact on the lives of the children that we work with. So we started from that basis, but then we also thought, how do we apply that to the work of the Children's Society? And we spend a lot of time as frontline practitioners that work one-to-one with children. A lot of those people will tell you they're really motivated by the change that they can see in young people's lives. So if they're teachers, they can get a student to fulfill their potential, that really motivates them on an individual level. But the thing that really frustrates some of our practitioners that work every day with children is they could spend a year working with a child and make a huge difference. And then they get the next referral in for a child, and it's the same issues that they're going to have to work on with that next child for another year. And the same thing goes round and round and round again. And that's how a lot of services, certainly in the UK, are commissioned. They're commissioned to work one-to-one with children, and often they're working on the same problems again and again and again on an individual level. So one of our practitioners came up with this definition, which is that they see different children all the time, but they see a lot of the same problems. And actually, systems change work for us is trying to break that cycle. So we'll always see different children, and they'll always have different individual needs, but we definitely don't want to be seeing the same problems again and again and again and not able to address them. So really what we hope through systems change work in the organisation, and oh, got some front row people there. Is that if we can make changes that are really sustainable, that affect those different things in the definition at the top, then actually the experience of children that go through comparable situations will be better in the future. And it'll mean our practitioners on the front line are more motivated. We've actually had a greater impact, which was mentioned from the floor in one of the definitions, and that those children will be better served in the future. And fingers crossed, we always say as an organisation we're trying to put ourselves out of business, but that would be a measure of success, that actually children are better supported because the system has changed sustainably for the future. So that's our go. I'm sure if we came back in a year, we would have a different definition, because we've been working on this for, as Adam says, a couple of years, and we know that this definition isn't going to be the end of the journey. We're still learning as to what it really means and how to put it into practice.
I think it's also worth saying, if you ask different people in the organisation, there might be slightly different definitions, just in case somebody's watching this live stream of our organisation. So I'm going to let Lucy sit down for a few minutes whilst I talk you through the background towards our work with systems change. So our journey back towards systems change. Why do we think it's important? And picking up on one of the comments in the discussion just before we went on the live stream, rapid social and economic change. So it's in the UK, I think especially since the financial crisis, there's been huge cuts to services in the UK. The provision for children has been significantly reduced. So we as an organisation are operating in a different climate, and related to that, what we see is intensifying need. So there's more reported cases of neglect, there are more risks online, there's more risks within communities, and that need takes the form of multiple disadvantage. So we're working with young people who very rarely turn up with just one problem. They're not, it's not a simple, straightforward issue to resolve. It's a myriad of complex problems that are related to each other and that affect each other. So, in order to respond to that, as we heard in a couple of the comments from the floor, you need a whole person approach. So you need to respond to young people as individuals. It's not enough to say, well, here's our mental health service, here's our exploitation service, here's our care service. Which one would you like to access? They need a holistic response to their whole experience. And that in practice means collaboration, which was also mentioned, the need for multi-agency working, and the need for different agencies to work really collectively together and to meet the whole needs of a young person. So when we started looking at our work in practice and our frontline services, what we could see were brilliant practitioners. We're really lucky to have really dedicated, phenomenal staff across the country. Some really great services as well that we can be really proud of as an organisation. But what we started to hear from practitioners was that when they were seeing these repeated problems, they see the same children coming back with the same problems, there were barriers to them addressing those problems. So they themselves would see them, but they couldn't go out and affect the underlying needs, the underlying challenges. And that was partly just because things are siloed. You know, you're commissioned to work on a specific service with specific objectives, with a specific contract, and that's your mandate. And it's also a question of culture and permission. Is it okay for a junior worker to knock on the door of a senior public official and say, you know, this isn't working, you know, what are you going to do? Is that okay? You have to be very confident as a frontline practitioner to feed back those challenges up to senior levels. So that was the context that we were responding to, and so we decided we wanted to take a systems change approach. And we're going to talk you through a specific case study that I hope gives you a good example of the way that we've responded in practice. So what would it look like to take a systems change approach to tackling the criminal exploitation of children? So criminal exploitation is when individuals use an imbalance of power to exploit or to coerce or manipulate a young person to commit a crime. So it could be a violent crime within a gang, it could be drug stealing. There's a big range of what criminal exploitation looks like. But we were thinking, we've got this problem, what does it look like to try and take a systems change approach to tackling it? So if you imagine a young person's experience, their journey, and you start off kind of pre-crisis, things are things are not at the point where loads of red flags are coming up and they're coming to the attention of services. And then over time, they reach a crisis point. And maybe the crisis point is that they've been picked up by police who found them skipping school, or maybe just excluded from school because they're not at school. They've got involved with the wrong crowd, and they've been picked up for drug dealing. So it's a crisis point. So what we observed is that you see children repeatedly taking this journey, and as a system, as a sector, our effort and our response is kind of 90% in this space. The sector repeatedly puts money and time and resource at this crisis point. So our starting point for thinking about how do we respond differently was to say, okay, well, let's change that. So the immediate thing that occurs to me is, oh, we should do more preventative work. So let's start putting some resource here before the crisis. So rather than just employing practitioners to work one-to-one with young people when they've been arrested, for example, or when they've turned up at a service, they've been referred to a service because they're in real trouble. Let's start working in schools. Let's start trying to reach them earlier and do some preventative work. That's fine. That's a good start. But then what you also see is that just simply adding more resource at this level is kind of operating on one dimension. There's an author called Donella Meadows who writes about the different leverage points in systems change. So different ways that you can try and change a system. And she says that simply adding more resource is the weakest thing you can do. It's the kind of the least effective way of trying to change a system. And she looks at what are the more effective ways, what are the more effective things you can try and change in order to make a system change. So you can start to try and change the information flows. So how do people communicate? How is information exchanged? Maybe you can speed up an information flow. Maybe you can add a new information flow. You can try and change the policies or the rules of the system. You can try and change the goals of the system. So what is this system trying to achieve? And then right at the top, you can maybe try and affect the culture or the whole paradigm. So that got us thinking, well, it's okay for us to move a little bit of resource from the crisis point and to do some preventative work about pre-crisis. But then what's happening all up here? What's the other work that's going on? So I mentioned in the discussion before we started the online streaming that as an organisation we have a policy team and we have a campaigns team. So it's not that this is being ignored. As an organisation, we are working at these levels. But I think what we wanted to try and achieve through our systems change programme was to bring that work together and to make the loop between all of this much faster. So rather than a frontline practitioner encountering a problem and then noting it to their manager, and then gradually that reaching the policy team, and then the policy team advocating to national government, and then national government talking about Brexit for 5 years, and then eventually responding. By which time we're in a fast-moving world. Maybe the situation has changed. So we wanted to try and speed up that cycle and to be able to respond to the system much more rapidly. So our response was to think, okay, well, what would it look like for us to design a single program of work that tried to operate at all of these levels, so that it was working one-to-one with young people at crisis point. Yes, we're doing one-to-one work and group work to try and prevent young people reaching crisis, but then we're also thinking about how is the system working together? What's the culture? How can we try and change the rules that are governing the system? How can we change the way that information is flowing through the system so that there's a whole systems approach to this problem? And that was the kind of conceptual framework for our Disrupting Exploitation programme. That's what we wanted to try and achieve. So we went on a very quick design process. In the social sector in the UK, you don't normally get funding to do design work. Funders expect you to have the answer. So they say, can you come to us with your solution? So you have to make time to do a design process to discover the answer. So Lucy and I, over the course of a few months, but both whilst doing other jobs, spent time interviewing lots of different practitioners from all across the system. We have a youth engagement team at the Children's Society who were talking to young people and trying to hear their perspective. We did workshops with a really wide array of different groups, from kind of health professionals to the social sector through to the police. It's really interesting to see the different tone that those workshops have. You sit down in a room of police and things happen very quickly. Yes, fine, boom, 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 and then you sit down in the social sector and everybody's talking about the underlying needs and the complexity of the challenge, which they both have their pros and cons. We did a literature review and evidence review to try and understand what the context was. And the objectives of our design process were to try and identify the gaps in the system, to identify partners, and I think in identifying partners also trying to create permission to do systems change. So there's as an organisation, if you're coming in and saying, hey, we're not just going to work one-to-one, we're going to change the way this whole thing works, that's quite a bold claim, and it's potentially quite controversial. You can imagine other organisations saying, well, hang on, who are you to take the initiative? So it has to be a collaborative effort. It's not something that one organisation just leads. It's about creating a space for collaboration where different agencies can work together to make this change happen. And then we designed the roles for the team. And Lucy will tell you a little bit more about what they look like. But one thing I want to emphasize before she goes into the detail is kind of what we felt was necessary for systems change to happen. So, as I said earlier, we've got hundreds of really talented, committed practitioners in the organisation who are working one-to-one with young people and with professionals on a day-to-day basis. Now, we didn't think that it was for us to try and dictate the way that our practitioners interacted with young people or with other professionals. They know what they're doing, they're talented, they have much more experience of this than I do, vastly more experience than I do. So it's not, when we say we went through a design process, we weren't trying to design the kind of interactions at a micro level between practitioners and young people. We weren't trying to dictate, this is how you should talk to a young person, this is how you should talk to another professional. Instead, what we were trying to build was what we called social infrastructure that gave them the space to do the work that they thought was necessary. So as Lucy shared earlier, when a practitioner has the experience of supporting a young person and they encounter a problem that is kind of, it's a big systems problem, and your reflection, like you're fighting the system all the time in your role as a teacher or working in a school, like our practitioners face that on a day-to-day basis. So we thought, what does it look like to give them the social infrastructure to actually do something at that point, rather than just having to report the problem up and hope that somebody more senior or somebody in a different team will take it to whoever. And we landed on four kind of different ingredients that we tried to design into the roles. So the first is time. So we reduced the caseload of our practitioners. So practitioners work one-to-one with young people and they have a caseload, which is the number of young people they're expected to engage at any point in time. We cut it by 50%, so a really big commitment, so that they would have time when they noticed a problem to look into that problem more deeply. We gave them coaching from our design team, so when they encountered a problem and they wanted to explore it and understand it, they can call our design team and we will show up and use design methods to try and support them to dig into the challenge, to understand what's going on, and to design solutions or to design experiments that they think might work to address it. There's some money available so that when they come up with an idea and they think, I've seen this problem, I've explored it, I think I've understood it, and I've got these 3 or 4 ideas I think could make an improvement, there's some budget that they can actually use to make it happen. It's not a vast amount of money, and we're not spending vast amounts of it either. So I think one of the things that we might reflect on later is that actually maybe it's not the main barrier. And then finally the mandate, which is really important. So you've got permission. You can go, you can knock on that door. We have one of the practitioners or the service managers on Lucy's program, when we asked her what does kind of her systems change work mean in practice, she said it means that she says, "Can I come?" a lot. So if there's an important meeting happening, can I come? Can I be there? Can I ask that question? Can I be in the room when these decisions are being made? So giving our practitioners a mandate to cross boundaries that maybe they wouldn't normally be allowed to cross or think they're allowed to cross, to go to meetings that they wouldn't normally think of themselves as having permission to go to. So we tried to design these roles with this social infrastructure so that they could go ahead and start doing systems change in practice. That was the theory. That was our approach to the design. Maybe it sounds very neat, or maybe not, I don't know. Lucy's now going to talk to you a little bit about the practice, and you'll see that it's not neat. And we'll conclude by talking through some of the challenges we've encountered.
Right. Thank you. So, yeah, after we've gone through this design phase, Adam and I then tried to make it a reality. And I'm going to hope that's going to stay there. I think it will. So this is what the Disrupting Exploitation programme looks like on the ground. So we've got 14 members of staff. I'm one of them. And as Adam said, the biggest thing that we really did in terms of the organisational culture was we said, we're actually going to reduce the number of young people that we see on a one-to-one basis. And that was a really big decision for the organisation, because I don't know how you all report success in your organisation, but one of the biggest measures of success is how many young people have you supported directly? And we were saying, well, you're going to give us this amount of money, and we're actually going to probably see half the young people that you expect. And people were like, oh, I'm not sure if we can actually do that. And we're like, no, but wait till we tell you what we're going to do with the other half of our time. Because we know that actually, if you've got a young person in crisis, you can't say, oh, I'm just going to pause that crisis for a second and work on the system. So we needed to free up our practitioners to give them actually the time to do this work, and the kind of mental space as well to think about what they were seeing through their casework. So staff split their time 50-50, roughly, between one-to-one work and working on the system. And we're still trying to find a way to effectively measure how we work on the system. It's much easier, let me tell you, to say we work with 20 young people than we work with 10 young people, and also we do lots of other things to improve young people's lives and make them better. We work on culture, we work on information flows. But I think we're getting there, and I think we're able to tell our story a bit better now. So that was the first key ingredient that we had. We then wanted to make sure that the team were able to learn from each other in quite an effective and organic way. So whilst we're a national charity, everyone really knows, I don't know what you relate to, but you relate to your little team, don't you, and where you live and people you sit next to at work. So we wanted 3 different teams in 3 cities across England, but we didn't want them to feel like they were the Disrupting Exploitation team in London. We wanted them to feel like they were part of the national Disrupting Exploitation team. So they've got people that are doing the same job as them, that go through the same struggles and have the same joys and kind of successes in other cities. So we've got peer networks across those 3 cities, and they support each other. And that was quite critical, because doing systems change work is pretty tough. So you need to have someone who's going through the same struggles as you to also celebrate when you achieve that really small thing that might actually turn into something big. So that peer network was quite important for us. As Adam said, we have the budget, although over time I think the budget is less important than the permission to test new ideas. So most practitioners, when they come to interview, will definitely have 1 or 2 reasons why they really want that job. And it's working with young people, of course, that's the foundation. But they're also like, actually, this thing has really annoyed me for years. And if I could have some time and some support and some coaching, I would love to try something to tackle this. So some of those are really simple. So I'm just going to draw on exclusions, which I wasn't going to mention. But we have a practitioner who's been working with young people about why school exclusions in the UK are going up. So a lot more students than ever before are being excluded from school. And we were thinking a lot about the relationship between students and teachers, and how when things get difficult, a student doesn't want to talk to the teacher about what's really going on, what's happening, why they're behaving in that way. And the teacher's got 29 other students, if they're looking, and they only have a class of 30, to manage. So they're trialing out this kind of box in a school where a student can write down what's really going on for them, put it in, and then the teacher and the student can have a conversation outside of the classroom about why the behaviour might be more challenging, breaking down that thing. And it might not work, but that's the beauty of this kind of test and learn approach, that we can try new things and they can start small, but hopefully we can then scale them. And that doesn't cost any money. So one of the things we have learned is that it's not really the money that's the real barrier. If we find something that works, that will obviously cost money to scale, but the starting germ of an idea doesn't cost a lot. We've also got a role in the programme that we've called an insight and engagement officer. And this is really to work on kind of box number 4, which is that the insight from young people, we didn't feel was really valued as highly as it should be by the system. So a lot of the system values data, quantitative information, kind of something you can see on a piece of paper. But actually, how do you get the system to value what young people are saying about their own lives? So that role is dedicated to consulting young people, learning from other practitioners, and feeding that back to the police, to social services, to others. And that role doesn't see young people. So again, that was a shift from how the organisation would normally spend its money. And one of the reasons we do that is that the first people that are going to tell you that the method of exploitation is changing are the young people that are victims of it. So if we're not getting that feedback loop, as Adam says, really tight, we're actually going to not be effectively safeguarding young people as well as we can. Adam stole my story about asking if you could come to meetings. So we embed ourselves in systems. We are one part of the system, but we're effectively a very small part, and we don't have necessarily as many levers as maybe some of the statutory sector partners that we work with. So we have to be in the system in order to change it. And so we've deliberately, in this programme, we are co-located. So we sit with the police, we sit with social services, we try and spend as much time with them, building relationships, breaking down barriers, challenging culture as possible. And a big part of that was saying, oh, actually, the decisions that are made about children are made in this meeting. So my colleague says she sounds like a teenager. She's like, can I come? And so she goes to this meeting. And then she finds out that actually there's another meeting before that that decides which children get discussed at that meeting. She's like, interesting. Can I go to that one as well? So she's trying to change how young people are discussed in those meetings and which young people get through the thresholds. And she would never be able to do that without time. If she was managing crisis after crisis after crisis, it wouldn't be possible for her to be in those conversations. And we really underestimate that, I think, like how much time and permission it takes to have those conversations and give staff the confidence to do so. We've also finally got a national advisory board, and they're there to obviously kind of critique and challenge and continuously improve kind of the work that we do, but we've deliberately chosen that advisory group to represent the system that we're trying to change. So that group includes the police, it includes social services, so the children's statutory social care, it includes the Department for Education, it includes the Home Office, which is where kind of young people will go if they are criminalised, if they're kind of prosecuted for crimes. And so when we're stuck on a knotty problem, little did that advisory group maybe know, but they are part of the system that we're trying to change. So we've deliberately recruited them and got them as part of our journey into this. So this is how we on the programme have conceptualised and thought about systems change. So we'd said that we were going to work 50% of our time with young people, and we kind of knew what that would involve. We were like, okay, we've done that for, as Adam said, about 130 years. we know what working one-to-one with young people effectively looks like. What on earth does it look like for 13 staff to work on systems change, and how are we going to kind of break that down and think about it? So we will work on these 4 different components. So I'm just going to bring those to life a little bit and tell you a little bit about the kind of work that we'll be doing. So contextual work, that's about making the spaces that young people are in safer. So we will get referrals, and we use that term deliberately because we will often get referrals for young people, but on this programme we also get referrals for systems change problems. That's what we call them, like things that people want to change in the system. So we're working in context, so we are doing a lot of work trying to make schools safer places. So working with schools to look at how they plan for safety in the school. And what we would previously have done is we would have worked with a child in that school, and we would have made the child safer, but the school would have potentially stayed exactly the same as it was before. So actually all the other students in that school, and when that student left, the school would have stayed exactly the same. So we try and make the context safer. And we're working on things like schools, parks. We've had a referral for a bus route where young people were being trafficked on the bus route, and they wanted us to work with the bus company, because actually making that location and that transport route safer is going to have a longer term sustainable change for children that use that route and that method of transport. We do a huge amount of work on culture and professional training, and sometimes they overlap. So in that example, we train bus drivers and ticket conductors to identify young people at risk of exploitation. So we try and change the way that people feel about young people that they encounter, but the culture that surrounds them as well. We work on policy and procedure, which I think is the kind of probably the longest thing that we try and change. But that's when we see that actually this is something quite structural in the way that an organisation is working that we want to try and change. And the biggest thing that we do now is that, as Adam says, rather than necessarily passing that up through different organisations in the Children's Society or different teams, we're able to work on that locally. So I'll just bring that to life a little bit through an example. We had a lot of young people that were missing education because they were being exploited. So they weren't going to school. And in the UK, if you don't go to school, you trigger a fine for your parents. So your parents can be fined if you don't go to school. But a lot of the young people that we work with, they're living in poverty. They are really struggling. And part of the reason why they're vulnerable to exploitation is that they're poor. They don't have what other children have. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that fining that family is probably going to push them further away from support, further towards the groomers and the people that are trying to exploit them. So we're working with the council now to say, well, actually, if you know that family is vulnerable to exploitation, we're going to stop the fine so that fine doesn't happen. Because all that does is just push them further away from support. And that's not a deliberate thing that the council are doing. It's probably just something that no one has highlighted to them, that this has a really perverse consequence for the children you're trying to support. You okay?
So far.
For those online, we just had a bit of an incident, but it's okay. We then also work on information and intelligence, and information flows across the system. So I'm sure it's the case there. If you look at any kind of serious incident involving children where something's gone really wrong, in every single report, someone says information about this family or about this child wasn't shared with the right people at the right time. So, and that's in every single one. So we try and link up partners in the system so that the right information is shared. And I'm going to come on to an example of that in practice, but we're doing some work when a young person is arrested about how that information is shared more effectively. Because we know that actually by improving that, we can improve the system response to young people. So that's kind of how we conceptualize it, how we think about it. And in practice, what that means is when we get a task, we think about which box it goes into. It probably will cross quite a few. And then we work up a plan for how to work on that system issue. Some of those system issues are small, and I think one of the things I've learned is that it's okay to think, oh, actually I've made that tiny little change to the system, and I can probably say that I've done something towards that in about 6 weeks, 2 months. Then some of them are going to last the whole of the 3 years of our programme and more. And I think it's important, certainly for the staff on the ground, that you have both of those levels. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I can work for 3 whole years and see nothing. And actually, we need to have that combination. So I've kind of learned that it's okay to work on the quick wins as well as the things that are more systemic when it comes to systems change. Certainly to keep staff motivated as well to work in this way. So this is just an example to bring this to life. A lot of the young people that we work with, unfortunately, because as Adam says, criminal exploitation is about young people being forced to commit a crime because somebody is coercing and forcing them to do that because of the grooming process that they've gone through. So a lot of the young people that we work with do get arrested, so they come into contact with the police. And our practitioners will come in on a Monday morning and they'll probably have an email from the police if the information works effectively, or they'll be called on the Tuesday or the Wednesday to say, oh, this child that you're supporting was arrested at the weekend and they've been arrested for this and they're going to be prosecuted. And what would happen in other programmes is that the practitioner would probably go, oh no, how can I kind of make sure that this child is seen as a victim? And they would talk to the police and they'd talk to social services about that individual child. And then next week it might happen to another young person. But what we decided to do was actually, we want to work with police officers and with social services to try and stop young people being seen as perpetrators, being seen as people that have committed a crime. So the biggest thing we did was we started a partnership with the police in London. And this was quite unique for an organisation like ours. We were actually let into a police custody cell and we shadowed police for 24 hours. So I did 12 hours and my other colleague did another 12. And the whole idea of that was that we were going to learn from them. How does this system work from your perspective? What does it look like when a child comes in that's committed a crime? How do you support them? What systems do you use? And I think that one thing that's really important with that opportunity that we got to shadow is that it was quite brave, really, for the police to let us in. They didn't need to. They didn't have to do that. And we were obviously there to be a critical friend. We weren't going to say, right, everything's perfect. We were there to challenge. So we had to have a partnership built on trust, built on respect, and it takes time to develop those. So we went in and we shadowed, and on the back of that, we've trained over 1,000 custody staff in London that come into contact with young people on a daily basis. And we did that training. We used an immersive case study of a young person to say, okay, how would you support this young person differently? And this was our key message that we used: stay curious. Because actually, a lot of what they were doing, they had the kind of germ of the idea, but they weren't seeing what was really in front of them. So they didn't know that child. They didn't see their vulnerability. What they saw was the crime that that child had committed. And we would have never been able to deliver that training to the quality that we did and to get the traction that we did without the shadowing. Like, people will always deliver training to professionals, but really saying that we empathise with your role and understand it, there was a real permission in that and a real authenticity in what we were then able to deliver. And then talking about starting small, so these were delivered to all of the custody suites in London last week. And they are, in custody suites in the UK, there are bookcases. And the idea is that a young person or an inmate or kind of someone who's gone into custody can be there for 24 hours. That's the maximum time in UK law you're allowed to detain someone. So they can be there for a really, really long time. and there was nothing for young people to do. There was no interactions, there was no entertainment, there was no kind of professional to support them properly. So we asked young people, what would help you build a better relationship with the police? What would you like them to do? I know that no one wants to be arrested, but that's happened. So in that situation, how can we make it better? How can we break down that relationship that we know, if it doesn't happen in that moment, the moment of arrest can be when things get really, really bad. So they sent us some recommendations of things they would like to read. It's really boring if you're in a cell for 24 hours. And these were delivered to custody suites across London. And the idea is that they are a tool for police officers to use to break down the relationship between them and a young person. And it's a tool, but it means something more. It's that actually, we know that something's happened that means that you've got in a bad situation and something you've been arrested, but actually we're still a human being, you're still a human being, we still want to support you and we want to treat you with respect. And you never know what that might mean, because it might mean that child discloses that they've actually been exploited or that there's something going on for them, but it breaks down that system barrier, which is, we know that the relationships between young people and the police are really strained most of the time. The other thing we did was we got orange squash added to the list of drinks that were offered in custody, because children don't want to drink coffee, and that was all that was available. So little things like that. I think the big lesson for me is, don't underestimate what that can mean when you're trying to change a system, because sometimes those really small things, actually, when you think about changing culture, think about changing attitudes, they make quite a big difference. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're doing on the programme that I manage. But across the whole organisation, that's just one programme, and we are really trying over the next kind of, well, it's kind of our strategic focus really from now until, I don't know, whenever. We are trying to become an organisation that really embeds systems change and systems thinking into the way we work on a daily basis. So we're trying to empower our whole workforce to think that they can be systems changers. So going through training, having peer networks, kind of learning from one another in whatever service they're in, to believe that this type of way of working is possible, and that they don't have to see different children with the same problem again and again and again. We're trying to really shift that mindset in the organisation. And we're also kind of focusing on this programme and learning from this and others, is we're deliberately designing frontline programmes with that explicit focus on systems change, and seeking funding and partnerships that enable that to happen. So that's kind of how we're trying to move this forward. So Adam and I were really conscious that that sounds like a very neat story, and it doesn't sound easy, but it maybe sounds very linear. So we wanted to pick that apart a little bit and tell you some of the lessons that we've learned and spread some of that. Because we've been working on systems change for 2 years, and the programme that I manage has been running for a year. So I think we've learned a lot in that time. For those that are trying to adopt it, we'll share that with you so we can speed up that process. I think Adam and I were reflecting on the plane over, said that we underestimated how big a part of the system we are and how much our system needs to change. So we innovated and we tried to create new teams, but we did that largely within existing structures within our organisation. And actually, we were asking others to change their structure, but we weren't necessarily doing the same for ourselves. So that's a big lesson for us. And I think some of the challenges from staff on the programme is that, and we have had a bit of turnover on the programme, so some staff have left because they, I think, feel a little bit frustrated that actually we say that we're changing the system, but are frustrated with the pace of change internally. And I think it's a bit of a Pandora's box, systems change. You kind of open it and then you can't really close it again. People will go home, and if they finish at 4 or 5, they definitely won't stop thinking about the system they're in. And you've awakened something in staff that you have a responsibility to deliver on internally as well. And I think that's been something that we've really learned, that we need to move faster with our internal change, particularly to have authenticity when we're asking others to do the same. Recruitment. So recruiting systems changes is tough, it's hard, and it's really difficult because, particularly with this programme, we're asking people to be amazing frontline practitioners with young people, to be able to build a relationship with young people, to have credibility with them, and to do that on a Monday and then turn around and on a Tuesday knock on the door of the local authority or the police and say, oh, I'd really like to talk to you about your policy of arresting young people for a crime they've been forced to commit, and change that. That's really hard to recruit those people. You need to pay them well, you need to recruit in different places, and you need to train people continuously in how to work and the emotional resilience that it takes to do both. It's really hard to do frontline work, it's also really hard to do systems change work. And I think that we have learned a lot of lessons in terms of how to recruit people in that way. One of the questions that I now ask in interview is that if you could wave a magic wand and change something for the system for young people, what would you change? And it's really striking that some people have thought about that, and that's what gets them up in the morning, and they reel off loads of things. And some people, it's just not something they've really thought about, because they want to work with young people one-to-one, and that's their passion. But actually, we've really honed how we try and recruit and how we train staff. But that is difficult, and I think you need to recognise that in how much you pay staff as well. Like, you're asking staff to be able to straddle two quite different worlds, and that's difficult to do. So the third lesson we've learned is that crisis management will always come first when it comes to young people. Those people that work in schools or work in social services here will know that you will have the best will in the world to work on something proactive, long-term, systems change, system focus, and somebody calls and says, this child needs to be taken into care, or tomorrow we have to have a meeting about this child because they're going to be excluded from school tomorrow. And that is where you have to go. That's where you will be. So that's why we deliberately have always built in that 50% time, because if you fill a practitioner's time with working with young people, you're essentially filling their time with crisis management. And they won't be able to step back. And they might have ideas, but seeing those ideas through will be really challenging. So a recognition that you can't on paper ask someone to do something when their role is already full of crisis management. That's really a big lesson for us. In terms of some of the positive stuff that we've learned, there's definitely an appetite and an interest from frontline practitioners to work in this way. It's not everyone, but when you find those people, you can really see that they're motivated to come to work. And that motivation is to change the lives of young people at different levels. So they're motivated to change an individual life, but they get that long-term motivation about, why do I come to work every day and stay in this organisation? Because in a year's time, that system might be different. And the next young person I support, I know the police are going to respond to them better because I've changed that system a little bit in my local area. So there's a real appetite to work in this way. It just takes time. And this final point is really important, I think. When it does work, you really feel it, and it's really energizing, and you have to share those little successes when they come, because it's tough work changing a system. As we've said, changing ours is very difficult. So when you do get those small successes and those big wins, really celebrate them and share them among staff, share those examples and those case studies, because that's what's going to keep people going. You get a quicker return, I think, sometimes with individual work. You will see a young person's life change more quickly than you will see the system around them change. So you really need to share those examples when they come. That was it from us. I'm not sure if we've gone over time, lunchtime already.
We're 2 minutes over, that's fine, not too bad. What we thought we'd do is we're going to give you another 5 minutes now to talk in pairs or as your tables, to reflect if, what did you take from the talk, if anything? hopefully something. What resonates, what doesn't, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to feedback to the group. So if you want to take 5 minutes just to discuss it on your tables, and we'll hear from you in a few minutes.